Jimmy Butler, simply amazing yesterday.
He can shoot better than 40% from three-point range with ease. Tyler Hero is a baller.
Tyler Hero set the Nets here at Advent Health Arena on actual fire.
So now they're becoming a three-headed monster in Miami.
Bam Adebayo's block on Jason Tatum's dunk attempt was the best defensive play I've seen ever in the playoffs.
LeBron started it, and then Jimmy had the last word.
Jimmy Butler didn't just give the Lakers 40. He gave LeBron some of that too.
What if I told you about a team that had an all-time historic finals run, one where they were incredibly overlooked and shattered expectations, only for that same team to be swept in shameful fashion the very next season? Not just by any team. The Heat got swept and embarrassed by the team they embarrassed in that 2020 finals run. This not only represented the fact that they were below the competition, but the cold hard truth was clear. They hadn't improved in any category of their team from the previous season. Jimmy Butler choked. Bam Adebayo wasn't nearly as aggressive as he should have been. Tyler Hero was invisible on the court, and the Bucks dominated the Heat in every possible way. In order to truly understand the magnitude of this series and where the future of the Miami Heat is headed, we must go back and detail how they assembled this team, how they got so good, and how they fell so fast. This is the tragic downfall of the Miami Heat. The makings for the Heat team we see today started all the way back in the 2014-15 season, the year after LeBron James departed for his hometown Cavs. The Heat didn't have much of a direction. They extended all-star power forward Chris Bosh and finished the season with a mediocre record of 37-45. A tough season, as many expected them to play well despite the loss of LeBron. They still had the makings of a championship team. Chris Bosh only played 44 games out of 82 because he was dealing with blood clot problems and was sidelined for the rest of the season right after the trade deadline. Dwayne Wade played well at times, but you could tell he was beyond his prime years, and just not the same. The one silver lining from this season was the Goran Dragic trade at the deadline. In that deal, the Heat gave up 2 future first-round picks, showing that they still had full intention of contending and weren't afraid of gambling on their future to do so. Goran Dragic would be a fantastic addition to the team. His tough mentality and excellent scoring made him a key six-man/starter. Despite this, the Heat, a team that reached the finals the past 4 seasons, finished a game out of the playoffs at the 10th seed. People were worried. The Heat hadn't rebuilt it in forever, and their fans weren't looking forward to one. Not to mention, you still had Chris Bosh on a max payroll, and Dwayne Wade needed a new bag soon as well. Nonetheless, the Heat entered the 2015 draft with many questions. They couldn't exactly trade up to grab a franchise player. They simply didn't have the assets for that, so they had to stay in place at pick 10. They had an opportunity to grab a ton of picks from the Boston Celtics, who really wanted Justice Winslow, but they declined. This turned out to be a bad decision. Many believe the Celtics were offering the Brooklyn picks, which would end up going number 3 and number 1 in the next 2 drafts, but the Heat were so zoned in on Duke point forward Justice Winslow, they simply didn't care, and took him with the 10th pick. Winslow was expected to be a star for the Heat, a young player with a high ceiling who could excel at everything. In the second round, with pick number 40, Miami chose defensive shooting guard Josh Richardson out of Tennessee. Fans didn't know it then, but Jay Rich would end up blossoming into a productive young player and be involved in a huge trade as an asset in the future. For now, the Heat's future seemed bright. They had 2 aging but all-star caliber players in Bosh and Wade, and some nice young pieces to go along with them. That combined with an elite head coach and front office, and it was hard to be negative about what the Heat could become one day. The 2015-16 season began, and the team was already better than the previous season, starting out with a record of 12-6. People weren't sure if the Heat were actually a true contender. They were better than the lower seeds, but also weren't as good as the top seeds. Many things stood out this season, but one of the most important factors was the emergence of Hassan Whiteside. Whiteside was a complete unknown. He played 48 games for the Heat the previous season. He was in and out of the starting lineup, but this season he broke out and became one of the best shot-blocking centers in the league. The former second-round pick, who was unheard of, had stormed onto the scene with averages of 14 points per game, 12 rebounds, and 3.7 blocks per game. Whiteside had many believing he was the future of the Heat. Pat Riley believed this too, as in the summer of 2016, Whiteside signed a 4-year, $98 million contract extension. This represented a time of excitement for Heat fans. So many players with high potential that could blossom as the years go on. Going back to the regular season though, D. Wade was still one of the best shooting guards in the league, but it was apparent his decline was beginning. Chris Bosh continued to deal with tragic blood clot problems. He only played 53 games out of 82 and was then sidelined permanently, never playing another game in the NBA after this season. Terrible news. Many thought Bosh would elevate his game to the next level with this new opportunity. Now he was dealing with horrible health issues, and 3 years later, Chris Bosh retired. A devastating loss, and one that Miami wasn't prepared for. Now they had to scramble onto their feet to make up for the lost star power. Despite these setbacks, the team continued to battle. The Heat had something to prove. Different players fighting for a roster spot and minutes led to a competitive squad that was tough to beat. Players like Luol Deng, Goran Dragic, Joe Johnson, Amari Stoudemire all stepped up for him as they finished with the 3rd seed with a record of 48-34. A fantastic improvement over the previous season. This team showed grit and toughness. Even with the loss of Chris Bosh and the aging of D. Wade, the Heat weren't going to give up just yet. The 2016 playoffs were a journey unlike any other. First, the Heat faced off against the Kemba Walker-led Charlotte Hornets and won in 7 games. Wade played out of his mind levels of good this series. When the Heat were down 3-2 and headed to Charlotte, he put on a show in Game 6. 23 points and clutch shot after clutch shot, off balance, turning around, talking smack to the fans. You name it, he did it. Dwayne Wade showed that he was anything but washed this series, that he was more than deserving of a bag in the offseason. The Heat went on to face the young Raptors in the semifinals, and Wade continued to put the team on his back. 24 points in a Game 1 victory, 38 points in a Game 3 loss, 30 points in a Game 4 come-from-behind victory, and 22 points in an elimination Game 6 where the Heat took the dub. They ultimately lost in a blowout Game 7, but it was hard to be disappointed with how this Heat team battled. They fought in each one of their series, and while it was a tough ending, the competitive grit the Heat franchise has always been known for wasn't going anywhere. The Heat had 0 picks in the 2016 draft, which put even more pressure on Justice Winslow to blossom into a star. Miami used a high pick on him. 6 points per game in his rookie year wouldn't cut it. In the 2016 offseason, the Heat made a few interesting decisions. One of them was signing Dion Waiters, who ended up being a solid addition to the squad. That was a good move. What wasn't a good move was letting Dwayne Wade go. Wade felt he deserved a big extension for his excellent playoff run and for how much he's done for the organization. Pat Riley offered him a 2-year, $40 million contract, but Wade wanted more, and the Godfather didn't pay up, so D. Wade went to his hometown Chicago Bulls instead. Wade leaving represented a new era for the Heat, one without a direction, shifting between a contender and mediocre, refusing to rebuild, but also not being a championship team. Luol Deng signed a big deal with the Lakers, Joe Johnson went to the Jazz, and Chris Bosh essentially retired. the Heat lost many of their key guys. Miami believed they could be a primetime destination for players like Kevin Durant in free agency. That was incorrect. They missed out on every big name. The team basically blew up as the stars and starters aged. The future was now one big question mark. Despite all of that, the 2016-17 season was by far the definition of Heat culture. The roster was a mix of young players trying to find their way, and veterans looking to prove their worth. Players like Justice Winslow, Josh Richardson, and Hassan Whiteside were all expected to take that next step and lead the Heat. Udonis Haslem and Goran Dragic were more than valuable and would provide the veteran leadership needed. The Heat had a terrible start, beginning the first half of the season with an ugly 11-30 record. A combination of injuries, tough schedule, and roster that wasn't the most talented led to this. Would this finally be the season the Heat commit to the tank? Would a franchise that's known for always being competitive finally give up and draft high in the lottery? No and no. The Heat weren't going to let this slow start disrupt their season. In the final 41 games of the second half of the season, the Miami Heat went 30-11, one of the greatest single-season turnarounds in NBA history. This team played for each other, which made up for their lack of individual talent. And when they needed a big play, they had options like Goran Dragic or Dion Waiters to hit the clutch shot. They just barely missed the playoffs due to tiebreakers, but it was hard to be upset at the season. An amazing show of strength by the Heat roster, not to mention the supreme coaching of Erik Spoelstra, was admirable. Still, despite this epic turnaround, there were many doubters. They didn't make the playoffs even with this run, so many criticized them. People said they gave up their chances at a high pick in a stacked 2017 draft in favor of barely missing the playoffs. Their draft stock went from what could have been very high to 14th overall. Did the Heat just squander their chances of getting a superstar in the draft? Most organizations would mess up here, but the Heat are simply different. Not only did they have an excellent turnaround season that put the culture on full display and showed the NBA what they're about, the pick that was supposed to hurt them because it lost value actually helped them in the end. They chose Bam Adebayo out of Kentucky with the 14th pick, a defensive-minded power forward / center who had promising playmaking skills. This ended up being a phenomenal pick. Bam has developed into an all-star and one of the best bigs in the league today, known for his lockdown defense, great passing, and smooth mid-range shot. The 2017-18 season represented excitement for the Miami Heat. The development of their young guys like Josh Richardson, Justice Winslow, and Bam Adebayo would be something to watch, not to mention the potential of this squad. Seeing how good they were in the second half of the previous season made you interested to see what was next. The Heat's most memorable move of the season was without a doubt trading for Dwayne Wade. The relationship needed to be repaired, and trading for him did just that. Wade could end his career playing for the Heatles. Besides that, Josh Richardson took that next step and became a reliable starter who could play great defense. Bam Adebayo showed flashes of the dynamic big he could become, and the Heat finished with a record of 44-38, making the playoffs once again as the 6th seed. It was an overall successful season. There were some disappointments, however. Hassan Whiteside and Justice Winslow both made you question their development, not taking the next steps you desire. Winslow only starting 15 games out of 68. That's not what you want from your 10th pick. Hassan Whiteside quickly became one of the most overpaid players in the league. Many believe he was regressing from his past successful seasons and didn't want to put in the work to get better, which is what the Heat were all about. So there was an obvious conflict. On the bright side, Goran Dragic had a spectacular season. He was the leader that the team needed and earned his first ever All-Star appearance, which was a huge milestone, not only for him, but for the organization. He represented the tenacity and perseverance the culture was all about. The Heat met the young and inexperienced Sixers in the playoffs, many believing Miami had a chance to knock them out. You could never count out the significance of having veterans plus good coaching. The Heat did put up a fight. They won Game 2 off the backs of a vintage Dwayne Wade performance. That's the farthest they went though. They let Game 3 slip away, then fell to a close battle in Game 4, and ultimately lost the series in 5 games. A rough ending, and quite disappointing to some. This is where people really began to question what the Heat's long-term goals were. They had absolutely no salary space. Contracts to Hassan Whiteside, Ryan Anderson, and Dion Waiters were hampering their plans of making a splash in free agency. Not only that, but Miami was also incredibly low in draft capital. No picks in the upcoming 2018 draft. They didn't have their 2021 pick either, and there was no one to blame besides the Heat themselves. They got themselves into this situation, and now they had to dig themselves out before it was too late. The Heat entered the 2018-19 season with mediocre expectations. This year was basically dedicated to Dwayne Wade and The Last Dance, his final season in the NBA, as well as keeping a close eye on the young guys and their development. Josh Richardson once again improved in many facets of his game, proving to be valuable in the trade market, as well as the Heat came incredibly close to trading him in a package deal for Jimmy Butler. The Heat's plan at this point was to shade some of their salary and turn themselves into the prime-time free agent destination they were known for in its past. Bam Adebayo improved, but it was minuscule and unnoticed by the NBA world. He played all 82 games, but only started 28. For the fans who were watching, his playmaking and defensive abilities shined bright, as his potential seemed limitless. Role players like Derrick Jones Jr. showed their worth as well, and a little-known, undrafted man out of Michigan, Duncan Robinson, would prove to be a pickup unlike any other, soon. Besides that, the season faded into mediocrity, and a 39-43 record found them outside of the playoff race by 2 games, a pattern that seemed oddly familiar as of late. Dwayne Wade took one last bow and exited for the final time. The end of an era that stretched for a decade plus. The greatest player in the franchise's history for the Heat was gone. The 2019 NBA draft was one of high importance for the Heat. They finally had a pick. This time it was at the 13th spot. They chose Tyler Hero, another Kentucky guy who could shoot the lights out while also creating his own shot. He would be an excellent pick who would be the subject of much controversy and debate in the future. The real splash came in free agency though. The Heat had been preparing and targeting for Jimmy Butler. Jimmy was a two-way star who could elevate any team to a championship level. He had a legendary work ethic that he was famous for. He would be the perfect match to pair with the established Heat culture. They did just that, acquiring him in a sign-and trade with the Sixers, giving up a former second-round pick, Josh Richardson, to do so. That's right, the Heat acquired one of the top 15 best players in the world for someone they drafted in the second round. Miami had done it. They've acquired a star player. For the first time since the Big Three era, they finally have someone who can be the #1 guy on a championship contender. These additions of Tyler Hero and Jimmy Butler were nice and all, but people looked at this roster and still doubted the potential of this team. Fans criticized Butler for leaving what was a surefire contender in the 76ers to a team that just missed the playoffs in the Heat. Many said Miami had no chance of contending for a championship, let alone a playoff spot. When you first took a glance at the Heat and their roster back in October 2019, not much stuck out to you. A lot of unknown names. The thing about this Heat team is that they created names for themselves. They shocked the world in the 2019-20 season, first starting off with a fantastic 15-5 record through the first 20 games, good enough for second in the Eastern Conference. They ended up dropping a bit as the season progressed, overall finishing with the 5th seed in the Eastern Conference, which was much better than many expected. Reminder, This team didn't even make the playoffs the previous season. They were below 500. And now they were not only in the playoffs, but one of the best 5 in the East. What changed? A lot of stuff changed, but the biggest factor was easily the Heat's bench depth. Players that nobody knew about a year prior were now key factors to Miami's success. Kendrick Nunn and Duncan Robinson were excellent offensive options, Robinson becoming one of, if not the best shooter in the league, and Nunn being a pure scorer. Goran Dragic was phenomenal, mainly playing off of the bench. He led the second unit with his veteran leadership and crafty shot creation and playmaking. The rookie Tyler Hero exceeded expectations. Besides being an absolute sniper, Hero hit what seemed like an endless amount of clutch shots. He had a swagger to his game that was unlike any 19-year-old. Bam Adebayo had finally taken that next step and became an all-star player. He was one of the best big men in the league and a guy you could put on to any all-star player and confidently assume he'd limit them to an extent. Jimmy Butler was even better. He was an all-star and to many a top 10 player in this league. Butler was the human form of what Heat culture was. From him waking up at 3 a.m. to go to the gym, to him being one of the most hardworking guys in the league, Jimmy empowered his teammates and led the Heat to the number 5 seed. Eric Spoelstra and Pat Riley continue to show their esteemed excellence, Riley building yet another contender, and Spo emerging as one of the best coaches in the league. But they weren't done yet. The Heat entered the 2020 playoffs in the bubble, and many believe the farthest they go would be the second round. They first squared off against the Indiana Pacers and swiftly beat them in 4, with Jimmy averaging 20 and Bam putting up 15 with 11 rebounds and 5 assists. It was business as usual, but the real challenge would come against the Milwaukee Bucks, led by Giannis Antetokounmpo. This is where the mighty Heat would fall. They simply had no answers for Giannis, is what many believed. Instead, the Heat shocked the world and dismantled the number 1 seeded Bucks in 5 games, a gentleman's sweep. Jimmy flipped another switch and bumped his series averages to 23 points per game. His Game 1 performance of 40 points in a win took the NBA world by storm, and by that point, the Bucks were already shook. The Heat simply dominated them. Bam Adebayo played even better as well, with averages of 17 and 12 rebounds per game. The Heat were able to build a wall in the paint and prevent Antetokounmpo from getting his usual buckets. Goran Dragic and Tyler Hero were both killers. Dragic was putting up 20 a night, as Hero was stepping in nicely into his role as a shooter. Eric Spoelstra had outcoached Mike Budenholzer and reminded the league of his greatness. The Heat had done it. They've shown the league that they are in fact championship contenders. Despite all of the doubt and criticism, their team made it to the Eastern Conference Finals. The Heat squared off against the Celtics and immediately flexed their dominance in Game 1, as Bam Adebayo had an iconic game-saving block on Jason Tatum to take a 1-0 series lead. Just a year ago, many fans of the NBA knew nothing about Adebayo and what he could do, but now, in front of the world, on one of the biggest stages, Bam had emerged as a star. Game 2 found the Heat winning once again, a close game with Dragic being the hero to deliver the win. The Celtics won Game 3 to make it a 2-1 series, and in Game 4, rookie Tyler Hero had a spectacular performance. 37 points, one of the greatest shows by a rookie in the playoffs we've ever seen, giving his squad a commanding 3-1 lead. The Heat closed it out in Game 6 to win the series 4-2. Capping off what was a season unlike any other. The Miami Heatles went from no playoffs last season to a trip to the NBA Finals. It was an extraordinary run, filled with upsets and close victories, amazing highlights and all-time performances. Miami was here, and they weren't going anywhere. The NBA Finals for the Heat was incredibly tough. At this point, the team was exhausted. Battling through the bubble in those conditions would take a toll on anyone. In the finals, Bam Adebayo was constantly dealing with injuries, and Goran Dragic dealt with a foot injury. that sidelined him for the rest of the series after Game 2. The Lakers took both Game 1 and Game 2, but Jimmy Butler wouldn't make it easy for LA to host the trophy. He had a monster 40-point triple-double to avoid going down 3-0, an iconic game where he shot 70% from the field to keep the Heat alive. Tyler Hero, the rookie, stepped up as well. 17 points, and this infamous facial expression. The Lakers then won Game 4 to take a 3-1 lead. Jimmy used all of his energy to put together another triple-double in Game 5 to deliver the win. So clutch down the stretch. He was quite literally dumping everything into this game. Despite all of this effort, the Heat lost in Game 6 in a blowout, ending their season in a depressing way, but it was hard to look back at it with disappointment. Jimmy Butler had an all-time incredible playoff run. There was no doubt that he could be the #1 option on a championship team. Tyler Hero showed more than enough flashes as a rookie. His big performance in the Eastern Conference Finals put his killer instinct on display. He had a chance to be a future star. Bam Adebayo had become an elite defender, ESPN going as far as putting him above Joel Embiid in the top 100 players list. Bam showed the NBA world his excellent playmaking ability for a big, and at some points doing work against Giannis, many even saying he locked him down. The Heat roster had tons of depth. Miami had loads of cap space to go after key free agents like the Greek Freak. Their coaching and front office was elite. They were a top of the top organization. How could you not be excited about their future? The offseason for Miami was one that was a bit quiet. They extended Bam to a max contract worth $163 million over the next 5 years. They drafted Precious Achiuwa with the 20th pick, who's had a rough rookie season, but is still only 21 and has time to grow. They signed Avery Bradley, an excellent perimeter defender with playoff experience. That's where the notable acquisitions stop though. They lost Jay Crowder, who was huge for them in the playoffs with his 3-and-D play. Not only that, but the high-flying Derrick Jones Jr. also departed. Some question these decisions, but the Heat weren't worried. After all, they did just make the finals with this squad. Why shake it up when you can just run it back? The Heat entered the 2020-21 season with a short offseason, beginning the new season only 2.5 months after finishing the last, but still having high expectations. Jimmy Butler only played 52 games out of 72, missing many of those with quarantine-related health issues, and the Heat suffered badly as a result, starting out the season with an ugly 7-14 record. During this time, the James Harden trade saga was also going on, where many believe the Heat had the perfect amount of assets to land the superstar. The Rockets gave them a trade package involving young player Tyler Hero and a boatload of picks and other young guys, and the Heat declined. This decision is still heavily criticized till today. Many think Miami should have mortgaged their future because a big three of Bam, Butler, and Harden would be too good. Nonetheless, Miami turned their season around, finishing with an 18-18 record at the All-Star break and a 40-32 record to finish the season. Their big splash was a trade for former All-Star Victor Oladipo, but he suffered a knee injury and missed the rest of the season after only playing a few games for them. Goran Dragic missed time. Jimmy missed time. The squad never really had time to gel, and for that reason, people believe in the Heat's ability to make yet another championship run. That brings us to present day, where the Heat squared off against the Milwaukee Bucks in round 1 as the 6th seed. Reminder, just last season, the Heat pulled off an upset unlike any other in round 2 of the bubble, so what's stopping them from doing it again? Well, no upset happened. Every single game was a blowout in the Bucks' favor except game 1. Jimmy Butler played absolutely terrible. A man known for his playoff pedigree got utterly exposed by Drew Holiday. Bam Adebayo was nowhere to be found. As unaggressive as can be, those who believed he could slow down Giannis were silenced. His defense was a non-factor. Tyler Hero was also a no-show, as fans mocked him on social media. Now, he's simply known as the player the Heat didn't trade for James Harden. The second-year man shot an ugly 31% from downtown in the series. The Heat are the laughingstock of the NBA world, but how did it get to this point? How did a team who just had an amazing finals run suffer a humiliating first-round exit? To put it simply, the Heat were just out-talented by the Bucks. The Sixers put the right pieces around Joel Embiid. The Nets traded for James Harden and formed one of the best big threes in NBA history. And the Bucks, the team that was eliminated by Miami just a short playoff run ago, they improved their team dramatically, acquiring Drew Holiday and PJ Tucker to space the floor and provide lockdown defense. What did the Heat do? Acquire Avery Bradley. That's the problem. They were so content with their roster, they wanted to run it back, not improving their team as dramatically as the other teams did, and being out-talented in the first round. It was a horrible end to a confusing season, but the last thing the Heat should do is lose hope. Miami still has plenty of cap space to fill out their team, whether that's with star power or role players. They still have one of the best front offices in the league, one of the best coaches in the league as well. They still have Bam Adebayo. As frustrating on offense as he can be, he still has potential, and they still have Jimmy Butler, who we know is capable of great things. They have a chance to change for the better, shock the world again, and make a turnaround unlike any other. But for now, their story is known as a tragic downfall. Like and subscribe for more basketball content.